Okay, so let's talk briefly about programming. I think for a lot of people, if you ask them what's your program, people think of these short things, um, a 4 week cycle, maybe an 8 week cycle, maybe a 12-week cycle. But that's not how I look at programs. So that's how I deliver them to my athletes. However, in my mind, whenever someone asks me to write them a program, I try to look at things on a much larger scale, and then what I give them is the small pieces as we go along. And my reason for that also is because I don't want people to get overwhelmed. So, if you're currently struggling to squat 225, I'm not going to show you the whole program where eventually you're going to be squatting 315 for doubles and triples. Um, that might be the long-term plan, but in the short term, you don't need to be worrying about that. You don't need to be worrying about supermax. You don't need to be worrying about overspeed. You don't need to be worrying about all these other elements. Um, I need you to focus on what we're doing at this very moment, and so that's why I give programs in a short format as we're working. So whenever someone approaches me and asks me about programming, and they say they want to achieve something, whatever it is, they want to compete in Olympic weightlifting or something. Let's go with Olympic weightlifting as a simple example, just because that's so easily defined. So it's much harder when people come to you and tell you, I want to train for BUDS, I want to train for SFAS, like that kind of stuff. That gets really difficult because there's so many elements to it, and there isn't like a specified event. So like Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting, that's really simple because there's going to be a snatch and a clean and jerk, or for powerlifting it's squat, bench, and deadlift. These are really easy things to train for, at least in the sense of the complexity and the unknown variables. You're going to squat, you're going to bench, you're going to deadlift. So let's just talk about weightlifting or powerlifting. So basically, if someone tells me they want to compete in those things, I will sit down and think to myself, okay, where are they now? And of course, we need their current numbers. And then I think about the long-term strategy to get them to maybe a 3 times body weight squat. So let's just talk about the squat, because you can apply that to both weightlifting and powerlifting. So someone comes to me and let's say they're 150 pounds and they currently squat. Let's just make it 250. Okay, so this person says they want to compete in a strength sport. I'm looking at them and they're 150 pounds currently. So my projected goal is to get them to a 450 pound squat. Now in reality, I also recognize the fact that they're going to gain muscle, so they're going to go up in weight over time. So really, we're going to overshoot that by quite a bit. We're going to squat way more than 450 when this thing's done. But that's my end goal at that moment. So I make adjustments over time. But I think to myself, how do we get from point A to point B? And it really is not as complex as it sounds. Like when I talk about it in that way, it's because I'm explaining to you my thought process, but what actually goes into it is not nearly as complex as the way that I start pulling things apart. So my plan is to move people up incrementally over time. And I actually have a reason for that as well, and that is that I could put 100 pounds on your squat in a year probably, but that isn't necessarily the best thing to do, because we could burn you out and then your long-term development will actually be decreased. So let's say, person A comes in, they have, the 250 pound squat, the goal is to get them to 450. If we push it as fast as we can to go from 250 to 315, we might burn this person out. They'll be overtrained and they'll just be wrecked. And then now it'll take us even longer to get to 450. And that's a very important thing to factor in. Like if you overtrain and fry yourself, it's going to take a lot of time for you to recover just to get back on track. And that's just the nature of things. So my goal is generally to try to move people about 5 to 10 pounds every 6 weeks-ish. And obviously it's the law of diminishing returns, because the closer we get to that 450, the smaller those increments are going to be. And this is just purely hypothetical because, like I said, the fact is they're going to gain muscle, so they're going to get bigger over time. And so that 450 is no longer going to be a 3 times body weight squat. But the way I look at it then is I think about the length of time it'll take us to move from 250 to 450. Right? So we're going to try to put 200 pounds on a squat. And so I think about that and I break that down. Okay, so you take that 200, divide it by 10, it's 20. And then I just figure, okay, if we go up every 6 weeks, right? Every 6 weeks, we need 20 increments. Okay, you just take that 20 times the 6. Okay, so now you're looking at 120 weeks. So it'll take you 120 weeks to make that progress. So it'll take us a little over 2 years. And that's the way I look at it. And then I try to plan the program in those short intervals of 4 to 6 weeks at a time, focusing on some factor that we need to improve. So if I look at someone and I say, he is leaning too far forward in his squat, right? We'll start trying to correct that over time. And if we can correct that in 4 to 6 weeks, then we can move on to the next weak point. Oh, his knees start to collapse. Okay, well, we're going to spend the next 4 to 6 weeks correcting that and building strength. And the catch is that every time you fix something, something else pops out, right? So if I take a guy and I make his quads significantly stronger, now his hamstrings are disproportionately weak compared to his quad. So now we have to do hamstring work. And so if you think about this, what you're doing is you're basically fixing this, maintaining that, and then fixing the next thing. And then you try to maintain both those things and fix the next thing. And that's basically the way I approach programming, is that I think about it in terms of bringing up weak points, then maintaining that while fixing the next weak point. So every time you fix something, something else is weak. So if I make your quad stronger, now your hamstrings are lagging. So we bring the hamstrings up. Well, now we brought your quads up and your hamstrings up. Now your glutes are lagging. So we bring up the glutes. Oh, now your low back is the problem. So we bring up your low back. And then, once we get to that point, what's the limiting factor in your squat? Oh, well, maybe it's your quads again. So we're right back to the quads. But now, your low back was not quite maintained. So your quads got stronger, but we watch your low back start to go again. All right, we got to fix the low back. Maybe they start having SI issues, things like that. You might see symptoms of what's called femoroacetabular impingement. That usually can be fixed through strengthening, flexibility, mobility, stability, other facets. Don't get me wrong, if you have femoroacetabular impingement, I'm not going to say outright that you need surgery, but in some cases it may be a surgical issue. But oftentimes it's easily fixed if you catch it early. As soon as someone starts talking about, oh, I'm having hip pain, well, let's take a look. How deep are you squatting? Are you bottoming out every time? Because if you're bottoming out every time, your acetabulum, which if you picture your pelvis, is pitching forward, the femur's coming up, and it's actually making contact, and that's why you're having that problem. We'll stop bottoming out, and it'll stop impinging. You only have to get to parallel if you're a power lifter. I still will encourage you to be below parallel, but you don't have to hit rock bottom. And actually the same thing actually goes for weightlifting. I know everyone will try to bottom out because, oh, in the clean I bottom out. But that's significantly different. Because if you look at your back squat, you don't need to bottom out, because your back squat is going to be significantly heavier than anything you clean. So if you think about that logically, if you get your back squat below parallel but not necessarily hitting that rock bottom where the acetabulum and femur impinge, even if you get below, you're going to be building this huge level of strength. And of course, whenever you clean, it's a front squat, not a back squat. And so just by the position of having the bar in the front, your torso is going to be more upright, which is going to raise your pelvis up this way anyways. So using the back squat, you're going to see the torso more aggressively pitch forward, the femur is going to come up, you don't need to bottom out. If you get below parallel, you're getting all the effects that you want of strengthening your quads. And then when you go to clean, like I said, it's more like a front squat. Your torso is going to be more upright, so then the pelvis is not pitched forward like it is in a back squat. Your pelvis is up more, gives more clearance for the femur, which is why oftentimes, if you find that you have impingement in a back squat, switching to a front squat, suddenly you don't have that problem. So anyways, what I'm getting around to in this really long explanation, programming is more than just simply saying, oh, here's your percentages and here's your reps. And that's fine if you're just, getting an ebook and following, Wendler 5-3-1 or something like that. But if you're working with a coach, your coach should really be looking at your actual movement. This is why I don't coach people online. I coach people in person, and I look at them, and then I try to see where their weak point is, and then we do specific exercises to fix that weak point. Now, I can tell you, looking at something like a snatch, if you have a bad turnover, we're going to spend more time doing tall snatches to work on your timing, and then we're going to do muscle snatches to really reinforce your ability to turn over. If you can't turn over, you're going to miss. So we're going to work on those things. And it's just a simple matter of finding whatever that weak point is and then correcting it. If you have a poor power position, we're going to do a lot more hang snatches and hang power snatches. I want you to really drill that power position over and over and over again. We want to reinforce it. So if that's your weak point, you have a good turnover, but you have a terrible power position, all right, let's focus on the power position. And the thing is, it'll change over time. Maybe you correct that, and now because you're lifting significantly more weight, now you're having problems with the turnover. So we start working on the turnover. Some guys are weak coming off the floor. Some guys look like they're doing a deadlift because they're so slow off the floor. Well, we got to build that up so that you're getting faster and smoother through the movement, because the way I think of any lift really is that you're moving through a series of positions. If you're weak in any of those positions, you'll miss the lift, and your ability to move smoothly from one position to the next is what dictates whether or not you make that lift. So even if you want to take something as simple as a bench press, you've got a series of positions as it comes down, and a series of positions back up. Depending on where you miss, it could be a problem with your tricep. Your tricep is too weak. If you're missing, at the bottom or something like that, maybe your pecs are too weak. There's maybe your lats are too weak. If I watch your back move while you're doing your bench press. So very quickly you can start pulling these things apart. You find the weak point, you find why is this person missing lifts, and then you address that factor as best as you possibly can while maintaining all other assets. So all the other attributes that this person has, you don't want to let those fall behind. You try to maintain those while fixing this weak point. Once you fix that weak point, then you just find the next weakest thing and try to fix that. And that's why I think of training as a much longer program than just 4 to 6 weeks. And like I said, my approach to it is I try to make small increments over time, because we can go and max out every day. And maybe if I have you max out on squat once a week, you'll make faster progress, but there is a much higher chance that you're going to get burnt out, you're going to get overtrained, you're going to suffer an injury. And so I find that it's just better to take more time and spread things out, aim for that 5 to 10 pounds every 6 weeks, and plan it across that like I said, 120 weeks. Plan it across that period of time, because there's a much lower risk that you're going to get injured, and then there's a way less chance you're going to get overtrained. And I know everyone thinks that overtraining can't happen in strength sports because, it's just something that happens to endurance runners. But you can definitely fry yourself with strength training. But I don't know why people pretend like that doesn't happen. You definitely can fry yourself with strength training, especially if you do something crazy like you follow a Bulgarian program where you're hitting a max snatch, a max clean and jerk, and a max front squat every day. Very quickly you will burn out. So I think it's just a better strategy to focus on that long-term development and make steady progress. And if you make faster progress, that's great. That's great. Like sometimes you have an athlete who's just a hyper responder and they will make much faster progress. But in terms of actually planning it, I only plan to try to push the weight up by 5 or 10 pounds. If they're getting much stronger and they're making 15, 20 pound jumps, that's great. They're exceeding expectations. But as far as what I plan and expect, I'm only looking for maybe that 5 to 10 pound increase over a 6 week period. And like I said, that's why I spread it out so long. So I hope this is useful. I hope that you can take this into consideration with your own programming. And like I said, if you're working with a coach, your coach should be communicating this to you, even if they're only giving you 4 to 6 weeks at a time. They should definitely have a much longer idea in place where they want you to get to over a longer period of time, even if they're only training you on 4 to 6 weeks at a time.